Welcome to the first of two nights of the 2024 City and Borough of Juneau Municipal Candidate Forum. Many, many thanks to our partners at KTOO and the Juneau Empire for making this event possible and providing it live on their stations and websites. We are hosting tonight's event from the KTOO studios, which are on Lingot Ani. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that encourages informed and active civic participation. One of the ways we do that is to organize this candidate forum to help Juneau voters make informed decisions. Tonight's questions are from members of the Juneau League of Women Voters. This year's candidate forum is divided into two parts. Tonight we will hear from Assembly candidates over the next 60 minutes, and tomorrow, also starting at 7 p.m. and available in all the same places as tonight, will be the School Board Candidate Forum. And with that, I hand it over to our host for this evening.
Hello and welcome. I'm Clarice Larson, a reporter with KTOO.
And I'm Mark Sabatini with the Juneau Empire.
This forum is airing live on KTOO 104.3 and KAUK 91.7 FM. You can also watch on KTOO 360 TV, KTOO.org, JuneauEmpire.com, and JuneauLWV.org. If you want to watch the forum later, the video will be available on ktoo.org/watch or wherever you watch KTOO on demand.
Juneau's by-mail election is now taking place through October 1st. Ballots were mailed to registered voters last week. You can return your completed ballots to election officials by three methods.
First, you can send them in the mail with postage. They must be postmarked on or before Election Day. Ballots can also be placed in secure drop boxes that will be available 24 hours a day. They're located at City Hall, the Mendenhall Valley and Douglas Libraries, the AEL&P office, and the Statter Harbor Boat Launch.
Ballots can also be delivered in person to vote centers at City Hall and the Mendenhall Valley Public Library during business hours. You can also vote in person at both locations up through Election Day. You can find more voter information, including how to apply for an absentee ballot at juneau.org/elections.
And given the large number of candidates running for office this year, we're focusing tonight on the Assembly. There are 3 open seats this year. 2 candidates are running for mayor, 2 candidates are running for District 1, and 5 people are running for District 2. Juneau residents can vote in all races on the ballot, regardless of where they live.
Tonight we're going to forego opening statements to allow as much time as possible for questions. The first candidate, who was selected at random beforehand, answering each question will have 55 seconds. All subsequent candidates will have 45 seconds. We'll end with 1-minute closing statements from each candidate. We also have 2 candidates joining us remotely on Zoom, Neil Steininger and Doreen Lawrence. Mary Marks was not able to join us tonight. Candidates, please be mindful of the timer and wrap up when you're close to 0. The timer will ding when you're out of time.
And now for the questions, beginning with Emily Mesh. In what ways should Assembly members problem solve the complex issues of governing our city? How can we increase respectful civic engagement, and how have you participated in that as a citizen? You have 55 seconds.
Absolutely. Conversation and respectful discussion is essential for community governance. I think the precedent that the Assembly has already set in that regard is fantastic. I think there's a great cooperation between the current 9 members of Assembly, and I intend to keep on that, not tradition, but the habit going forward. I think it's important to listen to and hear from every vector of our community when we're dealing with complex issues. For example, the flood, for example, our education system, and make sure that we are including everybody's priorities when we are making decisions to move forward. It's essential. We're a community of 30,000 neighbors, and we all have ways that we can input, things we can input to get solutions.
Thank you, Emily Mesh. Nano Brooks, you have 45 seconds.
So it always starts with the people of the community. Getting as much people informed and incentivized to have input is going to allow the Assembly to make better decisions that work for everyone. The Assembly is great and transparent in many ways, but there's always room for improvement. And by having more forums between the Assembly and the people, more events that are hosted so that the community can give input, or more avenues for that type of input, is going to allow all Assembly members to work in the best interest of the people in a more effective way.
Thank you, Nano Brooks. Maureen Hall, you have 45 seconds.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I believe that it's really important to do our homework as Assembly members, study the packets, study the issues, gather the information, and talk to as many stakeholders as possible. And with that, then help inform the decisions being made at the Assembly level. We're a wonderful community, and I think the more diversity in the voices that we bring to the table, the better. And so as an Assembly member, I would work collaboratively with as many in our community as possible.
Thank you, Maureen Hall. Beth Weldon, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. We have a collaborative and efficient Assembly. We like to listen to each other. We do not always agree, but we are very respectful of each other, and I'm hoping that as mayor that I get a little credit for that everybody respects each other and gets along fairly well. But ultimately, you are our bosses, and so we try and do outreach for you. It was lovely to have a full house last night, but by the end of the evening, it was Mr. Sabatini was the lone member of the public in the audience, so we can't get that much feedback as we'd like. So in that regard, we just have given the city manager $50,000 to do a communication strategy and trying to figure out how better to interact with the public and get information out.
Thank you, Beth Weldon. Angela Rodell, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. I think it's important to recognize that disagreement doesn't necessarily mean dislike and lack of getting along, right? I think through disagreement, we often come to consensus solutions, and all too often it feels as though there's been agreement or there's too much emphasis on unity rather than asking really tough questions and really getting to the bottom of answers and getting to the bottom of issues with those answers. So I think it's really important to tease out and have people really ask the questions that are burning on their mind. And I think it's really even more important that we get as many people to participate in the Assembly meetings as possible.
Thank you, Angela Rodell. Connor Ulmer, you have 45 seconds.
Ganesh Chish, I think it's really important to make sure that we do keep a open communication amongst all the Assembly members, any future or past members, just to be able to hear from them as well, and also making sure that we do reach out to our entire community. And it's really important to also talk with all of our partners in our communities and make sure that we are hearing them and making sure that everyone is represented at the table. And I also think it's important to even listen to a little bit of people who don't fully live in Juneau, but who seek a lot of services in our community to make sure that we are still helping them out as well.
Thank you, Connor Ulmer. Doreen Lorenz, you have 45 seconds.
Well, as a citizen, I always put on my investigative journalist hat, and I tend to go on field trips a lot. I really appreciate when you're there, you actually get to see what's going on, talk to the people who are involved, talk to the neighborhoods and look for yourself and see what's happening, what the impacts are, and understanding that there's more than just two sides of a story. Usually when something comes up, there's a lot of different nuances, and you have to really not only listen, but hear what people are saying and take it to heart and work in collaborative, very civil decision making. But doing your homework, doing the research, really getting a good understanding of the problem is the only way to get a solid solution that's going to benefit everyone involved.
Thank you, Doreen Lorenz. Neil Steininger, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. I really see, having issues and problems come forward as a great opportunity to learn more about how other individuals in the community, interact with government and are impacted by the decisions that are made by the Assembly. An opportunity to learn about new topics and subjects. So I think there's a lot of collaborative listening to other people, but also kind of self-directed going out and finding additional information, doing the research, reaching out to some of those constituents that may not be as comfortable coming into an assembly meeting or sending you an email, and making sure you're getting all sides of an issue before you make a decision, and not just, relying on people to come to you with that information.
Thank you. Juneau Empire's Mark Sabatini will ask the next question.
And the next question starts with Nana Brooks. Like many community hospitals, Bartlett Regional Hospital struggles with management, financial, and workforce issues. What strategies can the city offer to ensure a quality healthcare system for Juneau residents? You have 55 seconds.
Well, at this point, it sounds like great steps have been taken as far as the mayor has referenced in other forums that there are talks between Search and Bartlett currently going on. And we need to do everything possible to make sure that this community has the best health care for all the citizens here, because we have an aging population, and we need to make sure that any needs or instances of emergency can be best fitted with the resources we have available. And right now, putting greater burdens through taxes on people, or just trying to go down one revenue source to try and fund everything, isn't working out in the best. And we really need to look at ways that we can diversify that revenue so that we can be more equipped to supply these types of services in a year-round fashion.
Thank you, Nana Brooks. Maureen Hall, you have 45 seconds.
Yes, thankful that Bartlett does have a new CEO in place, as well as seems to be doing a little bit better overcoming some of the post-pandemic staffing crisis. One thing I do see in our community to strengthen the healthcare system, I'm very concerned about the loss of many of our specialists. We no longer have dermatology, ophthalmology, cardiology, and the list goes on. So I thought, gosh, maybe we should send a delegation down to our medical schools and, let folks know what an incredible community we have, and try to draw some of those folks to Juneau to raise a family here and to join our professional staff at Bartlett.
Thank you, Maureen Hall. Beth Weldon, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. So one of the things that we do with the Bartlett, especially because there's so much going on, is we've had fairly regular meetings with them. If not the whole body, then at least the president and the CEO, and that just helps us understand. But one of the things we have to do, quite frankly, is hold them to what they need to do. And thankfully, between the board and the CEO this time, that they have turned around a little bit, and the last 3 months have actually been profitable, and that's the first time that's happened since 2019. So we're making progress. At the same time, we just found out last night that they're having to close Rainforest Recovery sooner than they thought, instead of the transition period that we thought. So we're going to be dealing with that at Finance tomorrow to see what we're going to do with that situation.
Thank you, Beth Weldon. Angela Riddell, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. As the capital city, it's really important that we have a sustained regional hospital. and that hospital be viable and work for not just Juneau, but the entire region. It's imperative that we listen to the people who are running that hospital and understand what the decisions are and the difficulty those decisions are. Rainforest recovery should not have come as a surprise. 4 months ago, the Assembly was alerted that if they partially funded, then they would run the risk of losing key personnel, and that's in fact what has happened and caused the closure. And so 3/4 does not make a trend.
Thank you, Angela Rodell. Connor Ulmer, you have 45 seconds.
Yeah, I think it is super important to make sure that we are looking at all different avenues to make sure that the hospital is profitable, and also to look at partnering with Search even more. I know Search is a native healthcare organization, but they've done amazing work in all of our rural villages where they are the only source of healthcare for people. And they don't even have full doctors, they just have some nurses and on-call staff. So I think looking there to see how we can work with them more to make sure that we're able to serve everyone, not just in our community, but also in our region who do come to Juneau for health services.
Thank you, Connor Ulmer. Doreen Lawrence, you have 45 seconds.
Well, I always like to start with what we have before we move on to things that we're expanding. So I would look at our board. We're asking a lot of civilians. I would make sure that they have the resources they need so they can engage in best practices. And additionally, I want to make sure that we're looking at as partners, not competitors, those in the community who also work in healthcare delivery. We need to make sure that we're giving the best bang for our buck to our citizens. And that means not necessarily duplicating services, but perhaps divvying them out so that each healthcare provider can really focus on their specialty and give the best care in that area as possible. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but there's absolutely no reason for us to be competing in such a small market.
Thank you, Doreen Lorenz. Neil Steininger, you have 45 seconds.
Yes, I think stable leadership at the hospital is incredibly important, because with that will come stable advice to the Assembly and how we can support the hospital in the things that it needs to do in order to be, run properly for Juneau. Maureen mentioned specialists, and I think that's an incredibly important thing to look at. The lack of specialists and the loss of specialists at the hospital impacts their revenue over time, but it also kind of clues into another big problem Juneau is having, and that's our need for in-migration. And I think some of the solutions that we can look at to attract people to Juneau generally can also help attract specialists to the hospital and can help work towards some of those demographic issues that Juneau is going to face over the next 20 years.
Thank you, Neil Steininger. And Emily Mesh, you have 45 seconds.
Like people have said, it starts with the leadership, and it means making sure that we can keep a CEO for more than a year. That's going to be essential for making sure that we right the ship of our hospital. We've already made a lot of difficult decisions in terms of what services to pare down. I think we need to focus on the core services of the hospital and make sure those are stable. And once that happens, we can slowly expand back our services moving forward. We also, I think, need to work on supporting our local social services providers that do a lot of the work that eventually will end up at Bartlett if they're not able to function properly. And I think that's where we need to start moving.
Thank you, Emily Mesh. KTOO's Clarice Larson will ask the next question.
How can our city better protect both people experiencing homelessness and property owners? We'll start with Maureen Hall. You have 55 seconds.
Thank you. And my work in the nonprofit sector, serving our vulnerable citizens, I would say the decision not to have a designated place for folks when the cold weather shelter closed down this past year has been pretty devastating. Dispersed camping where they're constantly having to move and no place to store their belongings, the trash, the chaos that comes with that has not been well. So I would say one thing we need to really look at is increasing our bed availability for low barrier shelter space. I'm very heartened by the addition to the Housing First project that will be open by this coming spring. Another, I believe, 28 units there. And also Gastineau Humane Services is going to be, they're in a big building project right now to increase housing.
Thank you, Maureen Hall. Beth Weldon, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. So we struggle with this almost every day, and one of the things that we have done as Assembly is given money to it. We spend almost $5 million a year addressing homelessness. So we've helped with phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of Housing First. And if you don't know Housing First, it's a wet shelter, so that people can drink there. And on this one, they may have to go to somewhere that they're allowed to have drug use, because that's the population we're looking at on the street right now. We're down from 100 difficult people on the street, difficult to deal with, to about 20 to 25, but they're very evident. So until we find a good spot to have our summer campground, dispersed camping, unfortunately, is where we had to end up.
Thank you, Beth Weldon. Angela Rodell, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. Since the courts changed their minds as to the tools that a community can use, I think we need to make sure we have everything on the table to protect property owners, to help our homelessness. $5 million is a lot of money to devote to the cause. We now have 300 families in the valley that are very worried about their homes and whether or not they will have housing. And as a town of 30,000, we have to think long and hard about where we commit resources. And so one of the things I want to commit to is making sure that we take care of our residents and that they have the tools that they need to take care of their property.
Thank you, Angela Rodell. Connor Ulmer, you have 45 seconds.
Yeah, I think it's really important to make sure that we do continue funding what we have been able to in our city. These people just aren't houseless people. These are our relatives, our neighbors, our family, our friends. So I think we need to really take a look at that from that perspective and not just looking at it as somebody who's houseless. I think it's also really important to kind of look at other ways how we can integrate this population back into our community. They were once people who helped out in our community one way or another. How can we make sure that they can come back in and be on the right track to better help our community?
Thank you, Connor Ulmer. Doreen Lorenz, you have 45 seconds.
Well, if the question is how to help the homeless and also assist property owners, my first thought is we need to have really robust first responder services. We need to make sure that when the homeless folks need assistance, we have folks who are prepared to give them assistance. They have good equipment, they have reliable communications, and they know that they have the resources they need to do their job well. You don't want to have a stressed person who's feeling at risk assisting somebody who is in peril. As a homeless person, you can get really bad outcomes that way. Additionally, you want to be able to have property owners call for help and know that help is on the way, reliable help that has all the tools they need to assist that property owner as well.
Thank you, Doreen Lorenz. Neil Steininger, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. I want to see continued support for the things we're doing like Housing First and the GHS project, as well as support for those social services organizations that go out into our community and serve the homeless population and try to help them. I also think we need to be looking more upstream at the problem, not just treating the symptoms, but looking at what is causing homelessness in our community, looking at how we can fund things like early childhood interventions, maybe partnering with the Alaska Mental Health Trust or other avenues we can go down to help prevent homelessness, rather than just building up capacity to deal with it and taking on a larger and larger population.
Thank you, Neil Steininger. Emily Mesh, you have 45 seconds.
So this is a bell I'm going to probably ring a lot. And again, we need to support our social services providers. We have a lot of organizations that do great work in Juneau, whether it's Glory Hall, whether it's Family Promise, JAMI. All these organizations have their own roles, and I think CBJ has a leadership role in ensuring that they're able to coordinate with each other and fill gaps where necessary. Having them, these organizations able to coordinate with one another more smoothly will fill a lot of the gaps that we see that we currently have people slipping through. And I think that's Again, so supporting our social services providers, I think that's essential.
Thank you, Emily Mesh. Nano Brooks, you have 45 seconds.
It's so crucial, more now than ever, that we really get on top of the finances and get things streamlined, because this is an issue that is going to increase. We saw Ketchikan shut down their shelter, and that's 200 people that are displaced out of that. And we have the facilities available, so we can expect to see some of them coming over here. And, you know, the root cause of all this goes back to things like substance abuse and mental health. And we just had Rainforest Recovery and the program. So this really is a domino effect happening right now. And a thing that can address it all is if we really just ramp up the general fund and supply these services and these facilities so that they can do what needs to be done.
Thank you, Nano Brooks. The Empire's Mark Sabatini has the next question.
Thank you, and we'll start with Beth Weldon. How should the city address the problems of tourism-related overcrowding and meet some residents' requests for a, quote, time out, unquote, from cruise ships while balancing the potential loss of revenue? You have 55 seconds.
Thank you. Well, our tourism industry is one of our growing segments of our economy, so we have to be careful that we treat it carefully, because as Nano said, that we need money to do things. At the same time, we have to balance that with how the residents are feeling. So we've done quite a bit with our MOAs. It's going to take a little time because schedules are out 2 years in advance, but we have a 5 ship a day limit. We have 16,000 passenger a day with 12,000 on Saturday. We also have MOAs having to do with garbage. They're dumping their garbage, they're purchasing water. So we're continuing to do those things. I also think dispersing the tourists, so with the Seawalk, so we're continuing that all the way to AJ Dock. I'm hopeful that Eagle Crest will also help with removing congestion, and I'm hoping that a fifth dock will also help with congestion.
Thank you, Beth Weldon. Angela Rodell, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. I think it's really important to recognize both the tourism and the impact it has on Juneau, and both positive and negative. And one of the things I think we need to focus on is getting the fifth dock built and put in place and put in order. It doesn't add cruise ships at all. It just allows a ship to no longer hot berth or to sit out and tender in. And it'll create movement and less congestion downtown, which I think will be really important to utilizing the tourism industry. A lot of the jobs are really key to the economic development of Juneau, and we need to really focus on keeping those jobs here.
Thank you, Angela Rodell. Connor Romer, you have 45 seconds.
I really have to agree on the point of making sure that we do have that fifth dock in Juneau. Having that there will allow for that ship to not be sitting out in the channel, but also potentially moving some of the tour buses away from the other side of downtown so you don't have to be stuck in traffic trying to go through town. I also think it's really important for us to look away from just cruise ships for tourism. I think it's really important to make sure that we start to focus more on the independent travelers, because that will allow less people on cruise ships, but also that's still bringing in those people from out of town to come visit our city.
Thank you, Connor Ulmer. Doreen Lorenz, you have 45 seconds.
As a technical mark, I no longer have a timer, so you guys are aware of that. Thank you. So tourism overcrowding can really occur with taking advantage of some of the lessons we can learn from other cruise ship ports on Southeast. If you go to Icy Point, for example, they have a wonderful setup of great attractions that are spread out with really good, strong transportation between those different attractions. So there's a lot of movement for the tourists, and there isn't a lot of congestion. If you go to places like Ketchikan, not so much. Everybody seems to be packed in crowds in big long lines and then shifted from here to there without a lot of direction. We really need to look at best practices and engage those here in Juneau. Unfortunately, there's lots of different lessons we can learn from different places.
Thank you, Doreen Lorenz. Neil Steininger, you have 45 seconds.
And I'll echo the response of several of the people before me that new dock by the by the Coast Guard terminal would be really advantageous in spreading out the impact of tourists downtown. We also have to look at those MOAs that were signed and how those are going to impact over time. I think we'll see really positive impacts from a 5-ship limit, as well as the passenger limits. That will really lessen that feel of the tourists coming in. But we need to be very supportive of the tourism industry because it's how we're bringing in a lot of young people, giving them kind of a taste of living in Juneau, getting them hooked, and hopefully some of those people move here. It also supports a lot of locally owned businesses that serve us year round. And I think that's really important that we don't lose that inside of congestion.
Thank you, Neil Steininger. Emily Mesh, you have 45 seconds.
So I'll serve as a point of example for what Neil just said. I wouldn't be in Alaska if it wasn't for the tourism industry. That's how I moved here in the first place. I think we have a situation where there's certain portion of the population that is absolutely dependent on tourism for the livelihoods, and we have some people who feel like they're losing their city, and we need to have buy-in from both of those parties for whatever solutions we have moving forward. I want to echo a lot of things that people have said in terms of having our 5th dock. I want to increase our cooperation with Alaska Native corporations like Hunatotem, like Goldbelt, like we're seeing with Eaglecrest, Sea Alaska, and again, just hearing from everybody, getting input from everybody, having that buy-in is going to give us solutions without generating conflict.
Thank you, Emily Mesh. Now, Nana Brooks, you have 45 seconds.
The tourism industry is extremely crucial and foundational in our community, and we're heavily relying on it. There's 3 great assets in this community, and that's the people, tourism, and the land. And it seems like every time something needs to be done around here, there's more leverage put on the people and the tourism industry. And there's a lot of individuals in the community who feel like that more is being done for tourism than what's being done for them, even though the tourism directly benefits them. But I want to make sure that the people are always being put first, and having people be heard and listened to means that when there's room for economic growth and expansion, they'll be able to digest it more.
Thank you, Nana Brooks. And Maureen Hall, you have 45 seconds.
Yes, talking to some of our residents, one woman said, we feel like we've been kicked to the curb. And so I think anything to increase the communication between both the tourism industry and the folks that live here. I know from our own family, all of my kids work summer jobs in the tourism industry. I think, also paying very close attention to our clean air and clean water. It'll be nice to have that ship be able to dock downtown and hook up to electric. And also addressing issues of the buses up at the glacier and the whale watching boats. We just really need to listen to everyone and collaboratively work on solutions.
Thank you, Maureen Hall. And Clarice Larson has the next question.
In light of the 2nd year in a row of devastating glacier outburst flooding in the Mendenhall Valley, what role does the Assembly play in dealing with this threat to Valley residents? We'll start with Angela Rodell. You have 55 seconds.
This is probably the biggest issue facing Juneau right now, and probably the most important thing as you consider how you're going to vote. The city has to do everything it can, full stop, to come up with both short-term and long-term solutions. And those long-term solutions mean looking at ways to force the federal government's hand, to make a lot of noise, to just push and push and push on a long-term solution. But we can't lose sight of the short-term pain that people are feeling and the fear that people are feeling. We have 300 families right now who are very nervous about the fact that Suicide Basin is refilling and that they're not sure what to do with their homes or how to protect their property. So anything we can do on that front to give comfort to people is necessary.
Thank you, Angela Rodell. Connor Ulmer, you have 45 seconds.
Yeah, I think it is super important to make sure that we continue to be ready to respond. I know from this past flooding, I've seen so many people, and it was amazing to see that the local tribe, Clinton Haida, was able to step up and help out all those communities. And it just wasn't tribal citizens that they went into homes and helped out. It was everybody. So I think making sure that there's that in place, that strong relationship with the tribe's emergency operation center, and also making sure that the city is able to build up its own response center for future floods where it might happen, and even other natural disasters like avalanches or landslides.
Thank you, Connor Ulmer. Doreen Lorenz, you have 45 seconds.
We obviously need to be able to communicate to folks what they can do and the best way to go about it. And I put on my investigative journalism hat. I'm reaching out to colleagues in Iceland and Norway who've had similar problems in their smaller villages to find out what kind of solutions they've had, not only to alleviate the danger of the event occurring, but what they've been doing to help the people who are directly impacted, not only in the short term where you're mucking out your house, but months later when you're trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do this winter? We need to have real solutions for people, not just hopes and dreams. And we need to have a plan so that everyone has reasonable expectations of how to move forward expeditiously to keep their family and their home safe.
Thank you, Doreen Lorenz. Neil Steininger, you have 45 seconds.
This issue, it's fairly close for me. My parents live on Meander Way on the river. This year was very heartwarming to see the outpouring of support from the community in the relief effort after the floods. You know, people being in each other's basements to help tear out wet insulation and all of that. Moving forward, we really need to be thinking about both short-term and long-term solutions. What can we do to reduce the impact of next year's flood? And what can we do to be the loudest municipality in the country to get the federal attention that we need in order to finance the bigger long-term solutions? Because this won't be a problem that goes away in 1 or 2 years, or that will be fixed by some sandbags. It's going to take a fairly large engineering effort.
Thank you, Neil Steininger. Emily Mesh, you have 45 seconds.
I think the level of attendance in last night's assembly meeting indicates how important this is. I think it's literally existential for the city of Juneau. So we need to be doing everything we absolutely can. I think Neil said this, Angela said this. We need to be looking at short-term solutions. We need to be looking at long-term solutions. We need to be looking at how we can restitute the residents who were affected by this year's floods as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible. Everything that we can possibly do needs to be on the table, and we need to be pushing on all levels at once to make sure that we're like short-term solutions, long-term solutions, and resolutions for what has already happened.
Thank you, Emily Mesh. Nano Brooks, you have 45 seconds.
When members of the community, especially hundreds of them, when their lives and well-beings are at risk, that's when things need to start happening now. And unfortunately, the federal government doesn't make things happen now, but the city has plenty of options that they could be doing, and there can be a multi-pronged approach to addressing things, and they would be a combination of short-term and long-term things, whether that be, forcing a permit to dredge out the lake and increase the capacity, using the fill from that dredging out to build up the banks, and then working with contractors that specialize in stilted homes. There's everything that possibly can be done should be done, and just waiting on the federal government's word isn't good enough right now.
Thank you, Nano. Maureen Hall, you have 45 seconds.
Yes, and I think it's really important to tap into the local knowledge on this. We have so many people, hydrologists, glaciologists, lots of experts in the community, and definitely tap into their knowledge to fast track any short-term solutions before next summer. I also think we really need to pay attention to those residents. Within those 300 homes, there are some people that are moving forward with making repairs on their home, but it's really expensive, and their contractors are in short supply. So what about those folks that don't have that opportunity to get on it? How are we supporting them now and months later when they're still being affected by this?
Thank you, Maureen Hall. Beth Weldon, you have 45 seconds.
Well, I think the combination of our response with the tribe, with the state, with our volunteer agencies, I think our response was pretty good for the flood. So now what's the next step? We don't own the river, we don't own the lake, we don't own the basin, so we have to work with others that do own those things. September 6th, city manager and the deputy city manager went up to Anchorage to work with the Army Corps of Engineers and all the other entities. So without politicians in the room and bosses, they had a really good conversation, lots of ideas flowing. It was an all-day discussion. It wasn't just an hour meeting. So they have some long-term potential solutions and some short-term solutions. And one of them is sandbags, but these are 6-foot-high sandbags. The other thing we're doing is I'm actually leaving on a plane tomorrow to go to Washington, D.C. with Katie Kester and 2 members of the tribe to start that process.
Thank you, Beth Weldon. Mark has our next question for the night.
The Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy calls for Juneau to rely on renewable sources for 80% of our energy needs by 2045, including heating and transportation. What strategies do you propose to increase community awareness of this goal, and what strategies would you advocate for us to get closer to this goal in the remaining 2 decades? We'll start with Connor Ulmer. You have 55 seconds.
I think it's really important to make sure that our community is fully aware that we are wanting to make this transition. I have heard so many people talk about why hasn't the city moved into more green energy and such. I'm just feeling that they might not all really know that we are looking at this transition. And I think a really powerful thing that we can do is work in the hydro energy. There have been a lot of small projects around Huna, Angoon, and KAUK for hydro, and that has done amazing for those communities. And it has also actually even brought back salmon into some of their streams. So it can be a win-win situation where we are bringing in clean energy, but also bringing back some of our salmon into our rivers.
Thank you, Connor Ulmer. Doreen Lorenz, you have 45 seconds.
I want to make sure people realize I'm not knocking on our local L&P folks, because I think they're fabulous. But when you go to their parent company, Vista, they do not have Juneau's best interests in mind. And that's all you have to do is read their annual report to see that. They've been blocking the Sweetheart Lake project, which could give us heating through all of downtown, could get Kensington Mine off of diesel. We could also look at ways of working our refuse. I know in Oslo, they're using refuse as a biofuel for buses and garbage trucks, in addition to heating as well. And there's a lot of different opportunities with the models that they're using that we could look at using in Juneau as well. We need to be all things, all time, looking at different ways of using renewable energy.
Thank you, Doreen Lorenz. And Neil Steininger, you have 45 seconds.
Mm-hmm. And I'll echo what Doreen said about the Sweetheart Lake or Sweetheart Creek hydro project. I think that'll be a great way to produce additional power for Juneau that is green energy. We also should be looking at, sources of federal funding for things like home heating swap out programs. Getting more heat pumps in homes will reduce our energy needs and reduce our reliance on heating oil in homes, which makes it cheaper to live here and reduces emissions for our town. We also should be looking at how we can make sure we're generating enough power, through an additional hydro project to get more of the cruise ships that come into town on shore power. That will reduce their emissions, reduce their fuel use, and make Juneau better.
Thank you, Neil Steininger. Emily Mesh, you have 45 seconds.
I think Alaska Heat Smart has been an incredible success story in helping to convert oil-based heating to energy-efficient electric heat pumps. They've been doing amazing work in the past several years, and I think we should continue to support them. I also think we need to increase our charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, especially downtown, where people don't have access to parking spaces where they can reliably charge their cars and are relying on street parking. I believe very strongly in the next 5 years or so, electric cars will be the cheapest option for personal transportation, but we need the infrastructure in place for people to be able to purchase those vehicles when they become available.
Thank you, Emily Mesh. Nana Brooks, you have 45 seconds.
I'm extremely passionate about this topic. In my free time, not only do I just sift through the charter, I also invent renewable energy generators and have a hydropower company myself. And this is something that Juneau is just perfectly positioned for to not only have hydropower, but an array of different renewable energy sources. And we should really be looking at how we can integrate that into all future developments and infrastructure in the community. You know, there's so much potential kinetic energy just waiting to be converted out there, and we're not utilizing enough of it right now.
Thank you, Nana Brooks. And Maureen Hall, you have 45 seconds.
Yeah, I think we're incredibly fortunate to live in Juneau, where we do have hydropower so readily accessible and potential for even more. So I think definitely continuing to develop that. I think as far as the city goes, we can take another look at electric buses. That was unfortunate. The first go-round was not terribly successful, but the technology has advanced, and also not just our buses, but the tourism fleet, you know, the buses idling at the glacier. So anything we can do to encourage that, also with all of our other vehicles with the city, to gradually phase in electric vehicles as they reach their lifespan, the end of their lifespan.
Thank you, Maureen Hall. Beth Weldon, you have 45 seconds.
80% by 2045 is part of our renewable energy strategy, which we have adopted, and Juneau Commission on Sustainability certainly gives us sound advice. Right now, we have 10 grants for 10 buses to be converted to electricity. As Maureen said, we had a little problem with our first one. It wasn't designed for cold weather, so now we're using Gillig, which is who makes our buses right now, and we're going to try their buses next, so hopefully our next one will do better. We also look at changing our fleet to electric whenever possible. Most of our passenger vehicles have been switched, but our next ones are our heavy-duty trucks, and the technology is not quite there yet. And in our buildings, whenever we do look at remodeling or renovating, we do consider heat source or ground source heat.
Thank you, Beth Weldon. Angela Liddell, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. This is just such an interesting, Juneau does have so much capacity here. As chair of Launch Alaska, which looks at the energy transition and the opportunities in the new technology, there's so much happening in this space that we can look to and learn to. There are different things that are coming online when we think about the landfill. While we don't own the landfill, control the landfill, it does create an opportunity for us to examine opportunities to reduce and impose low carbon emission technologies in some of the incinerators. There will be other ways. I have a heat pump system now in my house. Love it. Low cost. We can do these things.
Thank you, Angela Rodell. And Clarice has the next question.
Thank you, Mark. Should the Assembly increase revenues or cut services? What revenues would you advocate raising, if any? And if you were to advocate for cutting services, what should be cut? We'll start with Doreen Lorenz. You have 55 seconds.
Ooh. Obviously, we're going to need to move revenues over to address the problems that we're having in helping our neighborhoods with the flooding issues. That's going to take significant fiscal resources. We're going to have some matches with the federal. I think we already donated $3 million towards that cause, and I'm sure there's going to be more money chasing it. But these are investments we're making in our future to keep our families safe, our neighborhoods safe. And I don't think it's something that we can back down from. It's definitely not something people can do on their own. It's something we have to band together as a city and help those folks who are being harmed by natural disaster. To make up for these revenues, I think you're going to have to look across the board to find efficiencies in services and also in our operations, and hopefully be able to find efficiencies that can make up the differences there. But robust, essential services first. What we like to do.
Thank you, Doreen. Neil Steininger, we have 45 seconds.
Yeah, so I think really the job is making sure that we don't have to cut services, but that we can perform those services to the best of our ability without having to increase revenue. So the job of the Assembly needs to be, sitting down with the city manager to go through what we're doing and how we're doing it to ensure that we're actually working these problems in an efficient way. And I have pretty good confidence that the city is trying to do that. I have a lot of experience, though, over the last decade working with the state in finding that there, are ways with a new set of eyes that you can find a way to be a little more efficient. I don't think that we need to be letting revenue drive the services we have, but we need to make sure services fit within revenue.
Thank you, Neil. Emily Mesh, you have 45 seconds.
Well, let's be real. We've been cutting services. I think that's been the story of the last year. We've had to consolidate our schools. We've cut services from Bartlett. I don't know how much more we can cut before we're getting into the bare services that CBJ needs to provide. I think the solution is increasing revenues and that could be in terms of solving our housing problem. If we have more housing, then we have more people paying property taxes, and that burden is spread out across more people. If we can reopen a lot of the empty storefronts downtown, that's more commerce and more tax revenue that we get from there. I think there are solutions that don't necessarily involve raising taxes on anybody, but increasing tax revenue.
Thank you, Emily Mesh. Nano Brooks, you have 45 seconds.
It'll be a combination of things, It starts with responsible finances, having all these failing services in the community while having $20 million allotted for projects voted down by the people, and then asking the people for $20 million more in tax revenue is not the best way to have efficient operations. But we also need to be looking at how we can expand and diversify the industries in our community. We need to incentivize a level of manufacturing. Manufacturing will cut down on barge shipments, which helps with cutting down emissions and the cost of goods, which helps with sustainable living. But we also need to leverage the billions and billions of dollars in undeveloped land that is in CBJ holdings.
Thank you, Nano Brooks. Maureen Hall, you have 45 seconds.
Yeah, we should always be looking closely at the services we do provide and see efficiencies. Does it still make sense to fund this? One area, funding our schools beyond the cap, I think this is an absolute failure at the state level not to adequately fund our schools. And so I think really putting pressure on state government to do what they need to do. Also, I think looking to our congressional delegation to help with any of our needs that we can and be encouraging our partners that we are funding to explore additional grant funding for some of their programs. So those would be areas that we could look at.
Thank you, Maureen Hall. Beth Weldon, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. Currently, our budget is solid. Our revenues outdo our expenses, and that's including with a mill rate that's the lowest mill rate it's been since the early 1980s and probably 1970s. The chart didn't go back that far. So we just have to keep working with our economy. Our revenue this year was $5.7 million in extra sales tax that we hadn't accounted for, and that's because the remote sales tax is mainly where that's coming from. As more businesses are having to sign up for remote sales tax, we get that increase. Our property tax revenue actually went down by $366,000, but we're going to have a tough time with the mill rate versus the property tax this year because we are going to have to count for the houses that got flooded. So it's a continual challenge of revenues versus expenditures.
Thank you, Beth Weldon. Angela Rodell, you have 45 seconds.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have this upside down, and we put together our expenses, all the things that we think we need and want in services, and then we go out and determine how much to collect in revenue. But that's not the way we run our finances personally or privately or as a business. We only have so much revenue, and then we have to look hard at the expenses that we can focus that revenue to, starting with basic essential services and then going on to other services. Juneau is expensive, and we talk a lot about affordability, and we need to look really hard at what we're doing on the revenue side to make it unaffordable in Juneau.
Thank you, Angela Rodell. Connor Ulmer, you have 45 seconds.
I have to kind of agree with what Emily has been saying. Our city has been cutting a lot of services that our citizens really need. I think making sure that we're able to find that balance and not to where it's just the city that's providing all these services. We need to start looking at our partners in our community to provide these services with us, so it's not as big of a burden as on the city as it could be with other entities. And then it's just super important to kind of look at how can we develop our community more to bring in more of that tax revenue through additional housing and filling up our storefronts and everything else that comes along with that.
Thank you, Connor Ulmer. And that is it for questions. We'll conclude tonight's forum with candidates' closing statements, starting with Neil Steininger. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. My name's Neil Steininger. I'm running for Assembly District 1. I grew up in Juneau in the Mendenhall Valley, where my parents still live on Meander Way. I now live on Gastineau Avenue downtown. I have received so much from this community, a lot of opportunities that I received to grow up, be educated in the Juneau School District, to work jobs in the summer that helped me pay my way through college, that gave me the educational opportunities to bring knowledge back to town when I moved back in 2012 after college. And then I had the opportunity to, live in a beautiful town and live in a place where I could walk to work and enjoy my life. And I want to preserve that opportunity for people in the future. And I see a big demographic issue in Juneau coming up, and we need to attract more people and continue to have the kind of welcoming community that attracts people in.
Thank you, Neil. Emily Mesh, you have 1 minute.
My name is Emily Mesh, and I want to mesh things up. From the moment that I moved to Juneau, I knew that this was going to be the community for me. This is where I want to spend the rest of my life. And so almost immediately, I joined the Board of Congregation Sukkot Shalom, the only synagogue in town. Very shortly thereafter, I joined the Board of SIGLA, the Southeast Alaska LGBTQ Alliance, and I'm now president of that organization. I joined the Juneau Human Rights Commission, and all of these entities serve to build community, and that's what I want to do. I want to keep building our community. And I know that's something that takes dedication, it takes work, it takes empathy. And I know that I have the dedication, I know that I've been putting in the work, and I know that I have that empathy, and that's what I want to bring to Assembly if I'm elected. And that's what I mean when I say that I want to mesh things up.
Thank you, Emily Mesh. Nano Brooks, you have 1 minute.
I think we're all pretty tired about talking ourselves up. I hate trying to sell myself in words. I'd much rather do it in actions. And that's what I've done for this community, in action, through businesses, through work, through contribution. And it's because this is my home, my only home. This is the place where I was born. This is the place where I'll die. And I'll make sure that every ounce of energy that I expend in my life is going towards making this place the most amazing place in the entire world. Because I see it that way, but not everyone else does, and I want everyone else to see it like that. We have so much potential here, some of the most brilliant, bright, kind-hearted people here, and I see the longing for everyone to want more, and we can provide it for them, and that's why I want to represent your best interest on the Assembly.
Thank you, Nano Brooks. Maureen Hall, you have 1 minute.
Yes, again, Maureen Hall, running for Assembly District 2. 31 years ago, our family came to Juneau as part of the mining community when Greens Creek was reopening, and that was back when it was the workers lived here in town. Sadly, that industry, like so many, has become kind of a fly-in, fly-out. So, raised a family here. 2 of my adult children are raising their families here with kids coming into the school district. I've worked for 17 years as a school nurse, now retired, focusing on serving our community through my nonprofit work with St. Vincent de Paul for the last 9 years. I feel like my deep experience as a school nurse, we're working in both healthcare and education, so I bring that deep experience to the Assembly work and also the work with the nonprofit where we collaborate with partners all over town. So I feel like I have a leg up starting, and I hope you'll consider me for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen Hall. Beth Weldon, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Juneau is a great place to live, and I'm lucky to be the president of the Alaskan Municipal League this year, so I get to talk to a lot of mayors and other municipal officials, and people look throughout the state at the city government and how we do things and compliment us all the time. A couple of things to point out with childcare, which was one of the first things I did being on as mayor, was made a childcare committee, and we've been following down that path. But we're known nationwide for what we do childcare. We send our city people to nationwide conferences, and they pay the way, by the way, and they speak on what we do for childcare. For homelessness, I know we still have to deal with this issue, but we're thought of as successful with our homeless, and people talk to us all the time. I'm very proud of the Assembly and the work we do. Like I said, we're very collaborative. We don't always agree, and I saw the other Miss Hughes Scandies have to duck out, but she and I are a perfect example, come from a little different sides, but we can work together well.
Thank you, Beth Weldon. Angela Rodell, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I moved to Juneau in 2011 to go to work for the state. I worked in the Department of Revenue as a deputy commissioner and then as a commissioner under Sean Parnell, and I fell in love with this community, and it is now my forever home. When I think about the challenges ahead, and they are many, we have the flood fight, we have a demographic of young people leaving because they don't see the opportunity. We talk a lot about affordability at times. We have a hospital that's struggling. We have schools that are consolidating. I think it's time to turn into a different direction. And I want to lead you as your next mayor into that direction and into that future and find a way forward where we can have a much more affordable community, where we feel like the services in the city are responsive to the requests of its community and its residents. So I thank you for the consideration.
Thank you, Angela Rodell. Connor Ulmer, you have 1 minute.
My name is Deki Nauk, or Connor Ulmer, and I was born and raised here in Santa Kahini, otherwise known as Juneau. I think it's really important to make sure that we continue to bring in the younger generation into all these spaces. I currently work at Clinton Haida. I serve on the Juneau Community Council for Clinton Haida, and I've also recently just finished up my term on Sealaska's board as their youth advisor. And I think it's really important to make sure that we have these younger voices in these spaces to make sure we are looking into the future. One of the things that I really want to help bring and challenge the Assembly on is looking generationally. Looking at all the solutions of how the decisions we make, how they will affect my grandchildren's grandchildren. So that's kind of thinking I want to bring to the Assembly.
Thank you, Connor Ulmer. Doreen Lorenz, you have 1 minute.
So I'm a fourth generation Alaskan. I chose Juneau as my home because I just fell in love with it. I am a fiscal conservative, so I believe in really robust essential services, but keeping the community affordable, which means a low enough tax burden that young families can come here and not just survive, but thrive. And those of us who are on the other end of the scale are able to age in place with respect. I've served on city council before, as well as a number of boards and commissions, nonprofits, and fraternal organizations. And I'm hoping that you'll allow me to put my experience to work. I ask that you allow me the opportunity to earn your vote, and I hope that you would go to my website, DL for JNU, Doreen Lorenz for Juneau.com. I have over 100 answers to different questions that people have asked us during this process, and you'll find all my answers there. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today, and I hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you to all the candidates, and that ends tonight's Juneau Assembly Forum. Join us again tomorrow night when we hear from candidates for the Juneau School Board.
Thank you for joining us for the 2024 League of Women Voters Candidate Forums, co-hosted by KTOO in the Juneau Empire. And thank you to our audience and to those of you listening on the radio or watching online or on television. Remember, you can also watch or listen to tomorrow night's forum at 7 p.m. or come into the KTOO studios.